Wall Street Journal has confirmed the name of Wuhan lab scientist who was the first person known to contract COVID-19 or a COVID-19-like illness. Government officials told the Journal that Ben Hu first contracted COVID amidst his U.S.-funded gain-of-function research on coronaviruses. This report does appear to confirm the original reporting of Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi that we discussed on this show, who had identified Hu and two other Wuhan lab researchers as COVID's patients zero.
Meanwhile, records obtained by the White Coat Waste through a 2021 Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, confirm that Hu was a lead experimenter specifically on gain-of-function experiments funded by taxpayers via Dr. Anthony Fauci's NIAID and the United States Agency for International Development. According to the records, the NIAID and USAID sent portions of over $41 million in taxpayer-funded grants to the same animal lab where Ben Hu contracted COVID. Joining us now to break down what exactly is in these documents is Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Public Policy at the White Coat Waste Project, Justin Goodman. Thanks for joining us, Justin.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so what do you think the import of this confirmation of this story really is?
I mean, I think this is the smoking gun that everyone's been looking for. If we can confirm that Ben Hu did in fact have COVID, then I think every single sign now points to the Wuhan lab as ground zero and Ben Hu as patient zero. We've been following the money since 2019 to get to the bottom of what really happened in Wuhan. We followed the money from the NIH to the Wuhan lab. In 2021, we followed the money from the NIH to gain-of-function experiments at the Wuhan lab. And now, through our FOIA lawsuit against the NIH, we followed the NIH money to Ben Hu specifically, who, as you noted, has been identified and was unnamed back in 2021. But the State Department and others have been talking since 2021 about these sick researchers at the Wuhan Institute, and this confirms their identity and ties them directly to the experiments being funded by Anthony Fauci and the State Department to supercharge coronaviruses, and in this case, a lab leak, as many predicted would happen when this type of research might have killed over 10 million people and crippled the global economy.
Yeah, tell us more about the specifics of this grant and Ben Hu's involvement, because it wasn't just that, he happens to be doing this kind of research at the lab, but that this research was specifically funded on an NIH grant to do gain-of-function research. Tell us more about the specifics.
So Ben Hu first got on our radar back in late 2019 when we identified a paper that he was the lead author on, published with Peter Daszak and funded by USAID and the NIH, Fauci's division specifically, outlining how they were going into these remote areas of China, collecting wild bat coronaviruses and then bringing them back and engineering them in the lab to make them more contagious and deadly. Now, so that paper came out in 2017. We exposed in early 2020 the connection between NIH and Hu, but we did not know specifically how he was being funded or what his role was specifically. Now we know, again, that he's tied directly to these grants that Fauci was funding to, again, collect these wild viruses, supercharge them. Now, an added component to this is that Ben Hu was the lead researcher on the infamous diffuse proposal that Peter Daszak submitted to the Department of Defense, looking to basically create what became SARS-CoV-2. This diffuse proposal from 2018 was outlined the blueprint for the virus that caused COVID, and Ben Hu was supposed to be the guy on the ground in Wuhan to create this super virus. That proposal, as we know now, the Defense Department didn't fund it, but evidence suggests that they went ahead and did it anyway, and that's the experimentation that caused the lab leak.
Justin, where is Ben Hu and the other two researchers? And again, is there any effort to reach out to them, talk to them? Have they given any interviews since the start of the pandemic?
So I've talked to Michael Gordon at the Wall Street Journal in the course of his reporting over the last week or so. He reached out to all three of the patient zero. He said he did get in touch with Ben Hu, but he did not give a comment. But as far as we know, Ben Hu is still affiliated with the Wuhan Institute. I'm not sure of the whereabouts of the other two. Michael Gordon did indicate to me that one was now at a different institution, no longer at WIV. But we do know that all of them were there, and they've all been involved in one way or another in these gain-of-function experiments funded by U.S. taxpayers. A government accountability office report came out last week specifying that of that, as you mentioned, $41 million that funded these projects that involved Ben Hu, about 1.4 million did go directly to the Wuhan Institute. We don't know exactly how much of that went to Ben Hu personally, but we do know for certain that over $1 million of that money did go to the Wuhan Institute through NIAID and USAID, and that NIAID was slated to send even more money to Ben Hu and the Wuhan Institute for these dangerous gain-of-function experiments from 2019 to 2024, had White Coat not exposed that grant in early 2020, and subsequently, a few weeks later, Trump cut it in April 2020. So not only were we funding this incredibly treacherous research at the Wuhan lab on animals, but we were going to keep doing it had someone not blown the whistle.
Yeah, it's incredible because some of these, like you said, some of these projects did not go forward, but there's a serious question about whether they were underway and then still hoping to attract funding, and then some funding was still being granted, even during the period, right, in which there was this pause on gain-of-function research. Dr. Fauci has said under subpoena that he or someone in his position, greenlit under the exception clause additional gain-of-function research, and he couldn't, recall beyond that specifically what exactly which projects were given exceptions to continue. Is that, characteristic of the approach in your dealings and trying to wrestle all these documents from these agencies, just a kind of extraordinary level of bureaucratic neglect, of people not being fully aware of what's going on, in a distant laboratory halfway across the world in conditions that can't be closely vetted by the U.S. government?
Well, first of all, I think it's an absolute recipe for disaster to ship tax dollars to China or Russia or any other foreign adversary for dangerous animal experiments that could cause a pandemic. That was stupid to begin with. It never should have happened. But what's worse is that I would argue that this is way worse than neglect, because documents we obtained through our FOIA lawsuit, actually that provide for these Ben Hu documents, also show that back in 2016, the Fauci's NIH division not only allowed Peter Daszak to do gain-of-function experiments in Wuhan during the pause that Obama instituted from 2014 to 2017. So right smack in the middle of that, not only was Fauci allowing this to happen, but his staff was conspiring in writing with Peter Daszak and the Wuhan Institute. We have the emails where they let Peter Daszak redefine the definition of gain of function so that the experiments in Wuhan that he was shipping tax dollars to did not fall under the ban, and then went ahead with them anyway. Fauci claims in some of his depositions that he's given in Missouri and other lawsuits that his deputy, Hugh Auchincloss, who then took over NIAID when Fauci retired, was the one involved in greenlighting that project. But listen, there's a paper trail for all of this. There's a paper trail connecting Ben Hu to these dangerous experiments that the FBI, the DOE, and others think caused the pandemic. And there's a paper trail of Anthony Fauci and his minions actively involved in ensuring that the Wuhan lab could do these dangerous experiments and skirt a federal ban on gain of function. And again, this is what you get when you break the rules. There's no transparency and accountability, and you're shipping tax dollars to a foreign adversary that doesn't have our best interests in mind. This was the worst case scenario that people have been warning about for decades. It's why Barack Obama and Joe Biden put the gain of function pause in place in the first place, to avoid a scenario like this. And then Fauci and others skirted the rules, and I would argue caused a pandemic.
Justin Goodman, thank you so much for this reporting and for joining us here today. Really blockbuster stuff.
Thanks, Bob.